Brenden Nunes of the Kings Pulse podcast. And of course, James's partner over on the Kings Beat, as these two are fussing about their ice cream runs last night. Brenden, we appreciate you for being with us. We'll start generic. Most glaring takeaway from last night's game.
Just that the Kings need to kind of clean up the details. I thought that the turnovers were a big thing for them, and kind of watching it back through a little bit, I want to say they had 16 turnovers. They ended with 15 on the night, actually. And at least half of those were just really unforced, like dribble, not having a great handle, maybe just slightly a little bit of physicality, and then it went flying and getting back in transition on the other end. I thought was a little bit of an issue. So I thought it was a lot of the details, turnovers, and then offensive rebounds. The Kings want to be a force on the offensive rebounds themselves, and we saw that throughout the course of the preseason. They only ended up with 4 last night, and Portland ended up with 11. And I thought that those were the two big differences.
Yeah, Brenden, like when it came to the physicality, what did you take away from Mike Brown and Kevin Huerter, and who else do we have in post game? Fox. Yeah, like what did you take away when it came to the lack of physicality? Or I don't even want to say the Kings lacked physicality. I think they weren't ready for the physicality of the Blazers a little bit. And do you think that there are adjustments that can be made quickly?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we saw them be pretty physical. We know that that's something that Mike Brown is obviously emphasizing. I thought in postgame what stood out to me, because I know you were asking everybody about that, was Herter's response mostly, saying that, we've been playing really physical in practice, but there's no refs in practice. So I think that there's a little bit of an adjustment of they were getting a lot of calls really early. Mike Brown highlighted what they had. They had double-digit free throws, Portland, that is, in that first quarter. And then it seemed like maybe they were a little bit in their head about this whole one of Mike Brown's 5 staples on defense is being physical without fouling. And I think you just get a little in your head when you start to foul a little bit, and then the physicality went away. So I think there's a little bit of adjustment period there, but I think that we're going to see this Kings team be pretty physical, but that definitely was not a strong suit last night.
What was the, maybe a dumb question, but Kings fans, we've lived through some things. What was the mood like you mentioned, Mike Brown's availability and De'Aaron and Kevin Huerter. What was the mood like post game?
I mean, I wish that it was a little lighter, to be honest. I thought it wasn't all that down or anything, but for Mike Brown to come out and say right away in his opening statement that he didn't recognize the team that was on the floor, I think is pretty telling. So I'd imagine that they heard about it a little bit today in practice and post game during the game as well. So I wish that the mood was a little bit lighter, but I think it was just a lot of like, we have to clean up the little things. I don't know. I thought the energy in the building was good in general. So maybe I was a little bit excited and that was carrying over for me, but it didn't seem super gloomy or anything. Just more of like, we should have won this game, and they kind of let it slip away.
Yeah, I think again, Sabonis talked about that specifically. Like, we should have won that game. And do you think that that's a mentality that surprises you? Because let's be honest, the Kings have won 92 games in the last 3 years. Like, should they expect to win any game? Should they think that they should have won any game? And I'm not sure that they've earned that right, or that they should feel that way a lot of the time. But it still feels sort of like this team does. They believe that they are good enough to win any game.
I think if you're going into a game not thinking you can win it, you already lost. Like, I think just from a competitive standpoint, my coach is always talking about competitive spirit. And I think this team is talented enough and ideally cohesive enough, that's still kind of TBD, that they can win on any given night. So I think they need to go into every game thinking they could win. And I think when we're hearing about that post game, it just has to do with like they knocked down 17 threes to Portland's 11. They shot better from the field and from 3. And it's just those little details. Like, I think a night when you're shooting the way that you did when it comes to the Kings, that they really should win. And I mean, I don't know where you guys feel, but I think any given night, I know the Kings, another reason this Portland loss really sucks is these next 4 games are going to be really tough with the Clippers, Warriors, Miami, and there's one other one that's slipping my mind in there as well. But really tough stretch of games coming up here, and I don't know that the Kings are going to be favored in any of them, but I feel like any given night that they could come out on top, and I think it's important for everybody to think that, and very much believe that Mike Brown thinks he can win any given night.
I kept James Ham out of practice to hang out with me today. Thankfully, we've got Sean Cunningham reporting. Kings rookie Keegan Murray says he had symptoms during his bout with COVID-19, but feeling better after rejoining today for a full practice. His status is uncertain for Saturday's game, but he says he wants to play. He had a goal of playing all 82 games. Well, that's not going to happen, but hopefully he can play 81. How different do you think things will be, Brenden, with Keegan Murray back in the lineup?
I'm not sure about last night's performance. I think that maybe you would have saw less stretches of a stagnant offense. I think specifically like when Fox and Sabonis are out of the game, which I think is something that we're going to see more often than I would have expected coming into the year. But when you're running out a lineup of Davion Mitchell, Malik Monk, Terrence Davis, Trey Lyles, Rashawn Holmes, like you have guys that can score on there, but I think it's a lot easier when you have Keegan in place of Trey Lyles, and he's not somebody that's going to go get his own. So it makes me wonder, I don't exactly know how different last night looks, but I think it's safe to say I think that Keegan is a better contributor than Trey Lyles. And if he's eating those minutes and into some of TD's as well, TD got a lot of run last night. Maybe Keegan is the one that's closing that game instead of a small ball lineup. So for me, Keegan, the big difference is rebounding. I think that the Kings went really small. Like I mentioned, they were running Davion alongside De'Aaron and TD and Kevin Huerter, with Huerter playing at the 4. And I know that Portland doesn't have the biggest lineup themselves, but I think Keegan would have, I don't know how much the offensive flow would have changed, because I think that's more so on the initiators, but I think that rebounding is where that would have been a big plus for them.
You know, the Kings shot 44 threes in this game, and then you put Keegan Murray in that lineup. Are they going to shoot 50? I think we were all kind of surprised following practice the other day when Mike Brown and Jay Triano said they were expecting like 40, 42 threes a game. Like, is there too many threes? Is there a point where you're like, okay, this is too much?
I've been wondering the same thing. I don't know. And I'm curious what your guys' take is on that. I think that it can become too much if you're searching for threes. I think that ideally you're searching for layups, and in the process, you're creating open threes. And in my mind, that's the idea. But I think that 6 or 7 of their first 8 shots were all triples. And then after that, they went away from it for a little while there when the ball kind of stagnated at the end of that first quarter. So I don't really think so. There is probably a line, but I don't think we've seen it so far. I don't know that there'd be that many more triples if Keegan was out there. Like Trey Lyles got up 7 threes. I don't know how often you're going to see that. Is De'Aaron going to shoot 9 threes every night? I don't know. So I don't know if that number, it's just hard for me to imagine a number like 50 or that much higher than 44, maybe here and there. But what do you guys think about taking that many threes? There were only 2 teams in the league last year that shot 40 plus threes.
Well, what's the balance? That's what, James and I started the show with is, you've got to have some sort of presence inside. Like there's got to be some sort of threat to score inside, even if it's mid-range, even if it's De'Aaron Fox pulling up from, free throw line or whatever. Like there has to be a threat of that, because if there's not, at a certain point, teams aren't going to defend it anymore. And they're just going to defend the 3. And then what are you going to do? Like, I feel like you've got to establish something inside, and you have to do it relatively soon before people just like, yo, this is, hey, great job by Monty McNair. Surrounded these, De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis with 3-point shooters. De'Aaron shooting the 3 clip pretty well. Okay, let's just take away their 3. Let's just do that and challenge them to score inside, something they haven't done yet this season. So that's something I would be concerned with if this trend continues. I hope they find a way as soon as Saturday to come out and try to establish something on the inside.
Yeah, and just looking at the shots numbers, I mean, the Kings shot more than half their shots were threes. They had 85 field goal attempts, 44 threes. So that's crazy. That's 41 shots that weren't threes, where Portland shot 28 threes, 88 attempts. They had 60.
And they shot similar percentages, I think, from three.
Yeah, they shot 39.8, just a little bit better, but they only hit 11.
Yeah.
But that's a huge disparity. And I mean, that's why we're seeing 14 more free throws for Portland. I mean, the Kings, again, one of Mike Brown's basic tenets, like you defend without fouling. They didn't do that. I mean, they fouled all over the place. And I think like what Olivia was talking about, like, like they were in the lane a lot. They scored a lot of points in the paint as far as Portland, where they have 55 points in the paint, right? I thought that wasn't about Sabonis. That wasn't about like them attacking the rim because there's not a natural shot blocker. I think it's because people let their guy get to the middle of the key. And that's one of Mike Brown's other tenets. Like we protect the middle of the court. And the Kings didn't do a good job of that.
Definitely saw that. I think like some guys got backdoor cuts that they were allowing. I think De'Aaron had one or two, and I'm sure that's another thing that gets Mike Brown heated. And I think that's just not being it's not locked in, because Mike Brown made a point to say that he thought the effort was good. It just wasn't used in the right ways. So I think it's just cleaning up the recognition, the processing speeds, and kind of reaction time on all of these things. And I think a lot of the points in the paint are off of turnovers too. Like the Kings had a lot of turnovers, man. And I think that's another aspect of the 3-point shot falling, because I think those kick out passes to 3-point shooters are a little bit easier than hitting cutters. And I think there's a handful of times that those turnovers were trying to get maybe into the paint. So I think that really turnovers stood out a lot. And watching them back, I can't even tell you guys how bad they really were. Like it's really just dribbling off of nothing. I think Malik had one that people could probably think back to where I don't even know what ended up happening. He just got a little bit of a tough dribble when he was getting defended at the perimeter, and then he did end up blocking it on the other end, and that was a nice highlight block. But the turnover in the first place was pretty unforced. And
I think that happened to De'Aaron too. De'Aaron had one that he lost. I don't think he blocked the shot, but he came back. Maybe he blocked the first one, or he poked it away, and he wound up like stripping it out of, I don't remember who it was, hands, and it, went off out of bounds, and that kind of stopped the play. But it was two strong defensive efforts from De'Aaron after one of those turnovers that you're talking about right there.
Yeah, a couple of his turnovers were just fumbles.
Mm-hmm.
They were just like, wow, like, what are you doing? And I don't know if it was like switching hands. I know a couple of them were going right, which, of course, he typically goes left. But at the top of the key, he fumbled away a couple of balls with his right hand. Just surprising, because that, he's a guy who on occasion will have a 7 or 8 turnover game, but he's really more like a 3 turnover game per guy. He's usually pretty solid with the ball, not like a habitual turnover guy that's out of control.
I think it has to do with a lot of isolation last night too. Something else Mike Brown pointed out. And I think in the process of just dribbling a lot, I kind of think they maybe got a little caught up in isolation because De'Aaron was cooking. He was getting them to go down, and maybe you end up settling a little bit there. But one of the other staples, I've been very keyed in on these 5 staples Mike Brown has on offense and defense, and trying to get these into my brain, because it seems like he's doing the same for his staff and players as well. And one of his other ones is just making sure that you're taking care of the ball. And I don't think that we've saw that very much from, the 0.5 is what I was getting at, the 0.5 offense. And that's making decisions in 0.5 seconds within time of having the ball, whether that's passing, shooting, if you're going to go do a dribble handoff, if you're going to cut. And those quick decisions were not there last night. Like I think they got caught up a little bit in switching. Portland threw a zone at them that threw them off at the end of that first quarter. And I think just seeing sort of different defenses when more often than not, you were just dealing with more of a straight up man-to-man throughout the preseason. I think that there's an adjustment period to like getting used to a new offense against different types of opposing defenses.
You're listening to D-Lo and KC on KIFM West Sacramento 98.5 FM, KRXQ HD2 Sacramento, ESPN 1320, driven by last year's Elk Grove Dodge, always live on the free Odyssey app. James Ham in for Kenny today. Brenden Nunes of the King's Pulse and the King's Beat with us here talking about last night's opening night loss for the Sacramento Kings to the Portland Trailblazers. Anybody surprise you, Brenden? Any performance last night where you're like, "Ooh, wasn't expecting that"?
Maybe it's not the most positive, but
You want to say De'Aaron, don't you?
Well, I was going to say De'Aaron. That was the first one that came to mind, but I think that's the obvious one, so I went away from that. I'm actually going to go with Domas. And in a way that I thought he should have been more effective. I mean, for that guy who I think could be a league leader in rebounds per game, I want to say he was 4th last year, about 12 a game. For him to only bring down 4, I think is pretty substantial. And I don't know how much of it is on him compared to on the other guys setting him up. I don't think it's a coincidence that both Domantas Sabonis and Rashawn Holmes have bad games. In my mind, that's the guards not doing a good enough job setting up their bigs. So I thought that Domas could have been better as an individual. I didn't think there's a lot of moments at the end of that game where he's ISOing Justice Winslow, and it's a credit to Winslow that he's pretty good in switches, but I think Domas should be able to post him up, and getting a little bit more from him, I think would be pretty big for this Kings team.
James, anyone surprise you?
I was surprised that Terrence Davis was so impactful.
Yeah, you were.
Yeah. No, I mean, I like Terrence. Like I just thought that the numbers game he's up against.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that watching Mike use him against Damian Lillard, that told me a lot. That told me that Mike Brown has faith in him, which I didn't know that Mike Brown had that kind of faith in him, because we haven't really seen that. We've seen Terrence have some nice moments in training camp.
I was going to say, maybe that shows a lot of, at least for as Mike feels about Terrence, about what we haven't seen. In terms of the stuff that happens during practice that we don't get to watch.
Yeah, totally. And I've said it a couple of times, if Malik Monk doesn't step into the role and thrive in the role as, that guy in the starting lineup, I mean, in the second unit, Terrence Davis come for his minutes. Yeah. I mean, that's something that we've known the whole time. And, again, Monk could say, well, I feel more comfortable with Fox but that's just not going to happen. Herter is going to be the starter. And you saw last night why Herter is going to be the starter. He's just a knockdown 3. And I think that Monk is a more creative scorer than Herter, but he needs to be creative within the confines of the offense. And it's something that I think Terrence Davis was able to do. He was able to become he's like a mistake prone guy, prone player. And we've talked about that. You can't have too many of those guys on the court at one time, because then you end up having the Buddy Hield effect, where, you're just making it's not the sheer volume of turnovers. It's the sheer volume of mistakes on both ends of the floor that either cost your teammate or get somebody else in foul trouble or turnover. There are certain things that you do, but you can't have too many of those guys on the court at one time. And Terrence seems to be able to play within the flow of the offense better than the Monk at this point. And that's just kind of interesting to watch, because I didn't expect it to be the case, even though I do think he's a very talented player.
I got a question for you guys. When Keegan is out there and healthy, who from last night's rotation is seeing less minutes?
I know you want to say Terrence Davis.
Well, I mean, Trey Lyles doesn't play at all.
Yeah, that's Trey was
and that's not me bashing Trey.
Trey was tough last night.
Yeah.
Trey was tough last night. And Brenden, we also had the discussion about the kind of the unique position that KZ Okpala is in. If there's ever a point where he's not starting, is he just completely out of the lineup? Can you use a player like that in defensive spurts if you're not starting the game, right? If the team doesn't start the way you want to defensively, or you run into something in the third or fourth quarter, and KZ Okpala hasn't been played because Keegan Murray's now the starter or whatever, can you just throw him in there? What is his regular rotation? I don't know. I don't know if he has one.
Yeah, I'll say this too. We want to say that Trey Lyles is going to be, the odd man out, but the guy played 14 minutes, and Keegan Murray's going to play a lot more than 14 minutes. He might play 28 minutes. Yeah. He might play 30, by the end of the season, I expect him to play 30 a night.
Yeah.
So it's not just one guy. Like he will consume multiple players' minutes. And like in the chatting house, people have brought up, well, could it be Rashawn Holmes that loses those minutes?
I feel like that's the other one.
Yeah, it could be him, it could be KZ, it could but somebody's going to lose minutes. And if Terrence is going to be a guy who steals minutes, I mean, first of all, I'm intrigued by that because it didn't seem like that would be the case. Just because of the way you have 4 guards and they're going to need to eat minutes at the 3 as well. But I don't know. It's possible. I mean, again, Harrison Barnes, if he's going to play more like 30, 32 minutes a game versus 34, 35, 35, 36 last year for the Kings, that opens a few more minutes up. And I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued to see how Mike Brown's got tough decisions to make on how he's going to keep guys engaged, but also build out the rotation.
I think if you take the 15, 14 that Lyles played, and then 10 of the 25 that Terrence Davis played, you got about 25 minutes right there for Keegan. And in my mind, that's kind of where it goes. And you don't see those super small lineups where Terrence Davis is out there guarding Jeremy Grant. And I think that's where we saw like those offensive rebounds really kill him at the end of that game.
I wonder how much too is because Brenden, I said this to James earlier that I'm not sure that the plan going into last night was, we're going to play Terrence Davis 25 minutes. I'm not sure that was necessarily the idea as much as it was Mike watching the way Terrence Davis was playing and like, let's ride with this. Let's work with this. I wonder if there's a group of guys, Trey Lyles maybe being in that group, perhaps Rashawn Holmes being in that group, Terrence Davis being in that group where you're getting minutes. Those guys are playing. They're not getting DMPs. But does their play time depend on what's happening that game? Like last night, that was TD. That was Terrence Davis's game. But his Saturday night's game, Trey Lyles hits 3 or 4 threes. He scores down low a little bit. Is it, hey, Rashawn has 9 rebounds, in his limited minutes. Does it become something where guys' minutes fluctuate depending on how they're playing in the game, which is absolutely what I think happened with Terrence Davis last night.
I think so. I think it's an interesting coaching philosophy thing, right? That's going to fluctuate with every coach. I think it's a question everybody asks of, do you ride the hot hand or do you stick with what your most reliable starters are? And I think right now, while this 4 spot still seems to be up in the air, I know that Keegan Murray seems like the obvious option. But with that still being up in the air, I think that we will kind of see it rotate. Mike Brown has talked about he wants to make sure guys get run throughout the course of the regular season to keep them engaged. And I don't think that's just talking garbage time minutes. And one of the other things that stood out to me in yesterday's postgame was Herter, who obviously was on one last night, 6 of 9 from 3. He was talking about how he had the hot hand that night, but he feels like if somebody has a hot hand, that they should be feeding it, and that it was him that night, but it could be anybody else tomorrow night. It could be TD, it could be HB, it could be Malik. There's a handful of guys that it could be on this team. And he said, whenever it's their night, we should be feeding them also. So, it might be different when it's Terrence Davis or Malik Monk, and that means that he's sitting on the bench at the end of the game. We'll see if he still keeps that same mindset. I think that's when that gets tricky. But I thought it was pretty notable that Kevin Herter came out and said, like, if someone's got a hot hand, I think we should ride it.
I'll say this too. Just like looking at the way that the minutes just distributions went like late in the game, like KZ Okpala didn't play in the 4th quarter. And that tells you a lot, because that tells you that like that's going to be Keegan's spot. Like there's a good chance that's going to be Keegan's spot. And I also thought that he went away from Harrison Barnes and didn't come back to Harrison Barnes until it was really late. It was almost like he was searching for 3-point shooters late in the game and didn't even use Barnes at all in that capacity. I mean, we've seen Barnes like put up a ton of threes in the past, and he's been very effective in that situation. And, he played a lot of guys in the 4th quarter. I didn't expect to look at the box and see that 9 guys played in the 4th quarter. And, of course, you're going to have to make adjustments when Sabonis fouls out and stuff. But like I would have liked to have seen like a winning, like go for the win lineup late in the game and, start to see an established group. And again, I think that's partially because Keegan was out, and we'll see Keegan slide into that at some point.
Brenden Nunes, the King's Pulse and the King's Beat. Off the record, King's Beat Happy Hour. Brenden always gets a little He always gets a little comfortable on these happy hours. You got to become a premium subscriber to get the real comfortable Brenden Nunes. You got to go to thekingsbeat.com and become a premium subscriber to be a part of tonight's Off the Record happy hour with Brenden and James and Sean and their guest, Katie Christensen. Brenden, we appreciate you